When you've been married for over a decade, you learn to pick up on the little things. The way your partner's laughter shifts, the way her eyes dart away when you ask her a question. Those were the things I had been noticing with Isabella over the last few months. We'd had our share of ups and downs, but this was different. She was different. The warmth that had once filled our conversations was gone, replaced by clipped responses and cold indifference. I tried not to read too much into it. She said work had been stressful, and I wanted to believe her. But then there were the late nights, the whispered phone calls, and the sudden need to reconnect with an old friend, Victor. His name came up casually at first, a passing mention during dinner. Then it started to linger, like a bad smell that refused to go away. The tension reached a boiling point one evening when Isabella announced Victor was coming over for dinner. "He's been such a good friend," she said, her tone light and dismissive, as if this was something we did all the time. "I think it's important for you to meet him." I wanted to protest, but the kids, Noah and Emma, were already buzzing with curiosity about the guest. I clenched my jaw and nodded, deciding to keep the peace, for their sake. Victor arrived 20 minutes late, bursting through the door with the kind of energy that makes you want to shut it in his face. He was loud, overconfident, and had the kind of smile that made you feel like he knew something you didn't. He greeted Isabella with a familiarity that sent a chill down my spine, his hand lingering on her shoulder a beat too long. She didn't flinch. I forced a smile as I shook his hand, though every instinct in my body told me to crush it. "Nice to finally meet you, Victor." "Likewise," he said, his tone dripping with mock sincerity. "I've heard so much about you." We sat down to eat, and from the moment Victor opened his mouth, he dominated the conversation. He talked about his job, his travels, his accomplishments, anything and everything to make himself the center of attention. He barely acknowledged Noah and Emma, except to make a half-hearted joke about how kids these days didn't know how to behave. They looked at me, confused and a little scared. I gave them a reassuring nod, silently promising them I wouldn't let this man hurt them. What hurt the most wasn't Victor's arrogance. It was Isabella's reaction to it. She laughed at his jokes, even the ones that belittled me. She leaned in when he spoke, her eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was like watching a stranger inhabit the body of the woman I had loved for so long. "Logan," Victor said suddenly, pulling me from my thoughts, "you're a lucky man. Isabella's one of a kind." I stared at him, my grip tightening around my fork. "Yes, she is," I said evenly, though my blood was boiling. He smirked, taking a sip of his wine. "You know, I don't think I've ever met someone as beautiful and accommodating as her." The words hung in the air, their meaning as clear as day. I glanced at Isabella, hoping for a reaction, a defense, anything, but she just smiled, sipping her wine as if nothing had happened. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of strained conversation and forced politeness. By the time Victor finally left, I was physically and emotionally drained. As I tucked Noah and Emma into bed, their questions broke my heart. "Who was that man, Daddy?" Noah asked, his voice small and unsure. "Why was he so mean to you?" I kissed his forehead, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Don't worry about him, buddy. Daddy's got it under control." But as I stood in the kitchen later that night, staring at the empty wine glasses and the remnants of a meal I could barely stomach, I realized I didn't have it under control. Not yet. Something had to change, and it had to change soon. Victor wasn't just a problem. He was a threat, and I wasn't about to let him destroy my family. The night after Victor's first visit lingered in my mind like a bad dream I couldn't shake. I told myself it was a one-off, a strange evening where I read too much into Isabella's behavior. But deep down, I knew better. Something had shifted between us, and Victor wasn't going away anytime soon. Isabella, however, acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed as she prepared breakfast, scrolling through her phone between flipping pancakes, occasionally laughing at something she refused to share. Every laugh felt like a knife in my side, each one driving deeper into the growing distance between us. "Victor said he might drop by again," she said casually over her coffee, not even looking up at me. "Victor?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Why?" "Oh, He just really enjoyed dinner, she said, her words light, as if that explained everything. He said he likes our family dynamic. Our family dynamic? The words made me clench my jaw. It was bad enough he had invited himself over the first time. Now he thought he was part of this family? Later that week, Victor did return, and this time, he arrived with no warning. I came home from work to find him lounging on the couch, laughing with Isabella like he owned the place. Noah and Emma sat awkwardly on the floor, their toys untouched as they watched this loud, arrogant man invade their space. "Logan, my man," Victor said, standing up as if we were old friends. "Good to see you." I forced a tight smile, shaking his hand. "Victor, didn't know you were coming." "Oh, it was a spur-of-the-moment thing," he said, grinning as he patted me on the shoulder. "Hope you don't mind." I minded, but I swallowed my anger and sat down, determined to keep things civil for the kids. The evening went downhill quickly. Victor monopolized the conversation, cracking jokes at my expense and sharing exaggerated stories about his work. He made it clear he thought of himself as superior, throwing in subtle digs about my job and lifestyle. "You're in finance, right?" he asked, smirking. "That's steady. I guess not everyone's cut out for the excitement of sales." I gritted my teeth, refusing to rise to the bait. "It's a good fit for me," I said evenly. Isabella laughed, too loudly, as if Victor's insults were the funniest thing she'd ever heard. Her laughter stung more than his words ever could. The breaking point came when Victor turned his attention to Noah and Emma. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with fake charm. "So, kids, what's it like having a dad who's such a serious guy? Bet he doesn't know how to have fun, huh?" Noah's eyes darted to mine, unsure of what to say. Emma clutched her stuffed animal tighter, her expression uncomfortable. "Enough," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Victor, I think it's time for you to leave." Victor raised his hands in mock surrender. "Whoa, relax, Logan. I'm just kidding around. No need to get all uptight." "Now," I said, standing up. Isabella intervened, her voice sharp. "Logan, he's just joking. You don't need to be so sensitive." I turned to her, my patience snapping. "This isn't a joke, Isabella. He's disrespecting me in my own home, in front of our kids, and you're letting him." Victor chuckled, clearly enjoying the tension. "You're overreacting, man. Lighten up." I stared at him, my fists clenched at my sides. Every fiber of my being wanted to throw him out, but I couldn't lose control, not in front of Noah and Emma. I turned to them instead, my voice soft. "Kids, why don't you head upstairs for a bit?" They didn't need to be told twice. As soon as they were out of earshot, I turned back to Victor. "Get out," I said, my voice low and steady. "Now." He finally stood, smirking as he grabbed his coat. All right. Don't want to upset the king of the castle." As the door closed behind him, I turned to Isabella, my anger bubbling over. "This has to stop. I don't know what you're thinking, but this man has no place in our lives." Her expression hardened. "You're overreacting, Logan. Victor's just a friend. A friend who insults me in front of our kids?" I shot back. "A friend who doesn't know when to leave?" She crossed her arms, her defiance infuriating. "You're being ridiculous. If you don't like him, that's your problem." I stared at her, the woman I had loved and built a life with, and realized how far apart we had drifted. This wasn't just about Victor. This was about respect, trust, and everything our marriage used to stand for. And in that moment, I knew things would never be the same. The tension in the house had become unbearable. Each time Victor's name came up, my stomach churned with frustration and disbelief. He was everywhere. On Isabella's phone, in her conversations, and now even in the minds of our children. Noah and Emma had started asking questions I couldn't bear to answer. Questions like, "Why is Victor always here?" Or, "Is he mommy's best friend?" I had tried to keep things civil, to hold on to some semblance of peace for the sake of the kids, but every interaction with Victor was a test of my patience. The final test came on a rainy Thursday evening when Victor showed up, uninvited again, for dinner. I walked into the house after a long day at work to find him seated at my dining table, chatting with Isabella as if he owned the place. Noah and Emma sat silently, their plates untouched, their little faces reflecting the unease I felt in my gut. "Logan." Victor greeted me with his usual smirk, raising his glass. "Glad you could make it." I forced a tight smile, setting my briefcase down. "Victor, didn't realize we were having company tonight." "Spur of the moment," Isabella said, her tone dismissive as she handed him another helping of macaroni. Victor was in the area and thought he'd stop by. I clenched my jaw, fighting back the urge to say what I was really thinking. Instead, I sat down, determined to keep my composure. But as the dinner progressed, Victor's arrogance grew more unbearable with every passing minute. He told loud, exaggerated stories about his business deals, peppered with condescending remarks about my job. Isabella laughed at every word, her gaze never leaving him. The kids picked at their food, their eyes darting nervously between the adults. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Victor leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied grin on his face, and said, "You know, Logan, I think this family could use a little excitement. A real man to shake things up." My hands tightened around my fork, my knuckles white. "What's that supposed to mean?" Victor chuckled, lifting a spoonful of macaroni. "Relax, man. Just saying it might be time for a change around here." Before I could respond, he turned to Isabella. "What do you think, Bella? Wouldn't it be nice to have someone who knows how to take charge?" Her laugh was the final betrayal, a sound that echoed in my ears like a gunshot. She didn't defend me, didn't shut him down. She just laughed, as if his words were harmless, as if this man wasn't tearing apart everything we had built. And then Victor did the unthinkable. He reached across the table, picked up a spoonful of macaroni, and dumped it onto my head. "See? I own this family now," he said, laughing loudly as Isabella giggled beside him. The room went silent. Noah's fork clattered to his plate. Emma's eyes filled with tears. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of rage and humiliation threatening to consume me. I stood slowly, wiping the food from my hair, and looked at Victor. "Get out," I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. Victor leaned back in his chair, feigning surprise. "Oh, come on, Logan. Don't be such a buzzkill." I said, "Get out," I repeated, my tone colder now. "Before I make you." He smirked, clearly enjoying the chaos he had created. "What are you going to do, Logan? Cry about it?" I took a step closer, towering over him. "You have 3 seconds to leave my house, or I'll show you exactly what I'm going to do." Victor stood, his smirk faltering for the first time. "Fine. I was just trying to liven things up around here." As he walked toward the door, he turned back, throwing one last comment over his shoulder. "You should thank me, Logan. At least someone's bringing excitement into this house." The door slammed shut behind him, and I turned to Isabella, my anger boiling over. "What the hell was that?" I demanded. "You let him humiliate me in front of our kids." "Our kids, Isabella?" She crossed her arms, her expression defensive. "You're overreacting. He was just joking." "Joking?" I repeated, incredulous. "He poured food on my head and called himself the man of this house. And you laughed." Her silence was deafening, her lack of remorse cutting deeper than any words. I looked at Noah and Emma, their wide eyes filled with confusion and fear, and made a decision. "This ends now," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not letting him or you destroy this family." For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. I had been silent for too long, enduring too much. But that silence was over. It was time to stand up for myself and for my children. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on, knowing I had finally drawn the line. The house felt like a battleground. After the macaroni incident, I thought Victor had finally understood the message to stay away. I was wrong. 3 days later, he showed up again, this time uninvited and unapologetic. I had just gotten home from work, my tie barely loosened, when I found him sitting on my couch like he owned the place, flipping through channels on the TV while my kids sat silently on the floor. "Logan, my man," Victor said, grinning as he gestured toward the TV. "You've got a great cable package. ESPN, premium movies, top-notch." I froze in the doorway, my blood boiling. What are you doing here? Isabella appeared from the kitchen, her tone dismissive as she carried a tray of snacks. Victor just needed some advice about a project at work. I told him he could stop by. Again? I asked, my voice cold. We talked about this, Isabella. She rolled her eyes. Don't start, Logan. It's not a big deal. It wasn't a big deal? This man had humiliated me in my own home, disrespected me in front of my children, and now he was back as if nothing had happened. My patience, already thin, snapped like a twig. I stepped forward, planting myself between Victor and the kids. Get out, I said, my voice low and steady. Victor smirked, leaning back against the couch. Relax, Logan. I'm just here for some friendly advice. Don't be so uptight. I'm not going to ask you again, I said, my fists clenching at my sides. Victor's smirk turned into a laugh, a mocking sound that echoed through the room. What are you going to do? Throw me out? Isabella doesn't seem to mind me being here. In fact, he glanced at her, his grin widening. She invited me. The audacity of his words hit me like a punch to the gut, but it was Isabella's silence that hurt the most. She stood there, watching, her expression unreadable. She wasn't defending me, wasn't standing by me. She was letting him get away with it. I turned to her, my voice trembling with restrained anger. You're really going to let this happen? In front of our kids? Logan, you're being dramatic, she said, her tone dismissive. Victor hasn't done anything wrong. That was it. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to take it anymore. Wrong, I repeated, turning back to Victor. You want to see what wrong looks like? I grabbed him by the collar, lifting him off the couch with a force I didn't know I had. The kids screamed, their cries breaking through my anger for a brief second, but I couldn't stop. Years of frustration, humiliation, and betrayal surged through me as I shoved Victor against the wall. Get out of my house, I growled, my voice shaking with rage. You don't belong here. Victor, his arrogance finally cracking, raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, no need to get violent. But it was too late for that. He had pushed me too far. You think you can come into my home, disrespect me in front of my kids, and walk away without consequences? Logan, stop, Isabella shouted, stepping forward, but I held up a hand to stop her. No, Isabella, I said, my voice cold and firm. This is on you. You let him into our lives. You let this happen. Victor, realizing he was no longer in control, tried to wriggle out of my grasp. Look, man, I was just joking. No harm meant. I shoved him toward the door, his feet stumbling over themselves as he tried to regain balance. Get out, I said again, pointing to the door. And don't come back. He straightened his jacket, trying to regain some semblance of dignity. You'll regret this, he said, his tone dripping with bitterness. You don't know who you're messing with. I stepped closer, my voice low and menacing. You're the one who doesn't know who he's messing with. Now leave. Victor finally walked out, slamming the door behind him. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by Noah and Emma's soft sniffles. I turned to them, my heart breaking at the fear in their eyes. It's okay, I said gently, kneeling down to their level. Daddy's got it under control. You don't have to worry. I hugged them both tightly, vowing in that moment to protect them from this chaos, no matter what it took. When I stood, Isabella was glaring at me, her arms crossed. You didn't have to do that, she said coldly. You made everything worse. I met her gaze, my anger replaced by a deep, aching disappointment. No, Isabella, you did. And I won't let you drag me or our kids down with you. As I walked away, I realized something had shifted in me. I wasn't just angry. I was done tolerating the disrespect, the betrayal, the lies. Victor was gone, but the damage he had caused would take time to repair. And as I looked at my children, I knew I had to start now. The house was eerily silent after Victor's departure, the tension so thick it was suffocating. I sat on the couch, my head in my hands, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. I had always thought of myself as a calm and rational man, someone who avoided conflict whenever possible. But tonight, I had reached my breaking point. I heard Isabella pacing in the kitchen, her footsteps sharp and agitated. The kids were upstairs, tucked into bed after I spent nearly an hour reassuring them everything was okay. But was it? I wasn't so sure anymore. Finally, Isabella stormed into the living room, her arms crossed and her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "What the hell was that, Logan?" she demanded. "You completely overreacted." I looked up at her, my jaw tightening. Overreacted? He insulted me, humiliated me in front of our children, and you did nothing to stop him. If anything, you encouraged it. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You're being dramatic. Victor was joking, and you turned it into some kind of testosterone-fueled showdown." "Joking?" I stood, my voice rising. "Joking is teasing someone about their favorite sports team. Joking is a harmless prank. What Victor did was deliberate disrespect, toward me, toward our marriage, and toward our family." Isabella threw up her hands, exasperated. "This is exactly why I didn't want to have this conversation. You're impossible to talk to when you're like this." "When I'm like this?" I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface again. "Isabella, I've been nothing but patient. I've tried to ignore his comments, his behavior, but tonight he crossed a line. And so did you." Her face hardened. "So now this is my fault?" "Yes," I said bluntly. "You let him into our lives. You let him treat me like I'm invisible, like I don't matter. And the worst part? You laughed. You laughed at every cruel thing he said." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, but instead, she turned on her heel and walked away, muttering something under her breath. I let her go, too drained to continue the argument. My thoughts were swirling, my emotions a storm of anger, sadness, and something else I couldn't quite name. It was the realization that this wasn't just about Victor. This was about Isabella and the cracks in our marriage that had been widening for months, maybe even years. The next morning, the tension was still thick. Isabella barely looked at me as she made breakfast, her movements sharp and purposeful. The kids picked up on the mood, their usual chatter replaced by uncomfortable silence. As I dropped Noah and Emma off at school, I felt a pang of guilt. They didn't deserve this. They deserved a home filled with love and stability, not one fractured by conflict and betrayal. I promised myself I would do whatever it took to give them that, even if it meant making some hard decisions. Later that day, I took a walk to clear my head. The crisp autumn air was refreshing, and the sound of leaves crunching under my feet provided a strange kind of comfort. I thought about the man I used to be, the man who had fallen in love with Isabella, who had built a life with her, who had believed in the promises they made to each other. That man was still here, but he was tired. Tired of being disrespected. Tired of fighting for something that felt one-sided. Tired of pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. This wasn't just about standing up to Victor. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-respect, and my sense of control. I couldn't force Isabella to change, but I could change how I responded to her and the situation. When I walked into the house, Isabella was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up at me, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. She set her phone down, sighing. "What now?" "This can't go on," I said. "I won't let Victor, or anyone else, disrespect me in my own home. And I won't let you dismiss my feelings like they don't matter." She crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying things need to change," I replied. "I've let this go on for too long, and it's not just hurting me. It's hurting our kids. They see what's happening, Isabella. They know something's wrong." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But it was fleeting, replaced quickly by defiance. "I'll think about it," she said curtly, standing and walking away. As I watched her leave the room, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Whether she chose to change or not, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let myself be a victim in my own story. This was my family, my life, and I was done letting anyone else control it. The days following the confrontation felt like a standoff. The air in the house was thick with tension. An unspoken war between Isabella and me. She continued her routine as if nothing had changed, but her cold demeanor spoke volumes. The kids, too young to fully understand, were caught in the crossfire, their laughter replaced by wary glances and whispers. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table going through some bills, Isabella walked in. She avoided eye contact, heading straight for the refrigerator. I watched her carefully, the silence between us louder than any argument we'd had. "Isabella," I said finally, breaking the quiet, "we need to talk." She paused, her hand hovering over the fridge handle, but didn't turn around. "About what?" "About everything," I said, setting the bills aside. "This isn't working. We can't keep pretending like this is normal." She sighed and finally turned to face me, leaning against the counter. "I don't know what you want me to say, Logan." "I want the truth," I replied. "I want to know why you let Victor treat me like that. Why you've been so distant. Why you don't seem to care anymore." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she was going to lash out. But instead, she crossed her arms and said, "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Like this is all my fault." "This isn't about being perfect," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's about respect. It's about our family. Do you even care about what's happening here?" Her silence was deafening, and in that moment, I saw the cracks in our marriage laid bare. The woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had built a life with, seemed like a stranger. And I realized something painful but necessary. I couldn't fix this on my own. "I can't do this anymore, Isabella," I said, standing up. "Not like this." Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise with indifference. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done," I said firmly. "I'm done being disrespected, done feeling like I'm the only one trying to make this work. I deserve better, and so do Noah and Emma." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "So, what? You're just going to walk away? Leave your family?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not leaving my family. I'm leaving this toxic situation. There's a difference." She stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "I've already contacted a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm seeking full custody of the kids." Her composure cracked then, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. "You can't do that, Logan." "I can, and I will," I said, my voice unwavering. "You let Victor into our lives, into our home, and you let him tear us apart. This isn't just about me, Isabella. It's about our children. They deserve a stable, loving home, and I'm going to give them that." She didn't respond, her silence speaking louder than any argument. I left the room, the weight of my decision settling heavily on my shoulders. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The next day, I began taking steps to separate myself from Isabella. I moved into the guest room, creating a physical boundary that mirrored the emotional one that had already formed. I started gathering documents for the divorce, making sure I had everything I needed to protect Noah and Emma. Isabella, true to form, acted as if nothing had changed. She continued her routines, her interactions with Victor, and her attempts to undermine my authority in the house. But her indifference only strengthened my resolve. One evening, as I was tucking Noah into bed, he looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Daddy, are you and Mommy okay?" he asked softly. I knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Things are a little tough right now, buddy," I said honestly. "But I promise you, everything's going to be okay. I'll make sure of it." He nodded, his trust in me unwavering, and I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about me. It was about them, about giving them the life they deserved, free from the chaos and toxicity that had taken over our home. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, I was taking control of my life. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let anyone, Victor, Isabella, or anyone else, destroy what I was fighting so hard to protect. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, I felt a growing sense of clarity and determination. Moving into the guest room was my first act of independence, but it wasn't enough. I needed to rebuild myself, piece by piece, to become the father my children deserved and the man I once was. I started small. Waking up early, hitting the gym, and cooking breakfast for Noah and Emma before school became my new routine. The kids seemed to sense the change in me. Emma hugged me tighter each morning, and Noah started asking questions about my workouts, his curiosity a welcome distraction from the chaos we had been living in. Isabella, meanwhile, continued to act like my actions were a phase. She avoided discussing the divorce, dismissed my growing detachment as temporary, and even tried to charm me on occasion. But her attempts felt hollow, like someone clinging to a sinking ship. She didn't realize I had already jumped off and was swimming to shore. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Isabella approached me in the kitchen. I was chopping vegetables for the next day's lunch, a mundane task that had become oddly therapeutic. "Logan," she said, her tone hesitant, "can we talk?" I glanced at her but didn't stop chopping. "What is there to talk about, Isabella?" Her arms crossed, a defensive stance I had grown all too familiar with. "This, whatever you're doing, it's not you." I set the knife down and turned to face her. "What I'm doing is putting myself and the kids first. Something I should have done a long time ago." She scoffed, shaking her head. "You're overreacting. You always do." The calm I had worked so hard to maintain wavered, but I held it together. "Overreacting? Isabella, I've been patient for months, years even. I've swallowed every insult, ignored every red flag, and let you and Victor walk all over me. But not anymore." She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't let her. "I've lost myself trying to keep this family together, trying to make you happy. But it's clear now, nothing I do will ever be enough for you. So, I'm done." Her eyes flickered with something. Regret? Maybe? Fear? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She turned on her heel and left the room without another word. That conversation solidified my resolve. The next day, I contacted my lawyer to finalize the divorce paperwork. I wasn't waiting for her to come around anymore. This was my life, and I was taking it back. I also started leaning on my support system. My brother, Ethan, was a godsend. He opened his home to me and the kids whenever we needed a break from the tension. He reminded me of who I was before all of this, a strong, capable man who didn't let anyone walk over him. "Logan, you've always been the guy people look up to," Ethan said one night as we sat on his porch, watching the kids play in the yard. "Don't let her, or that jerk Victor, make you forget that." I nodded, his words sinking in. For the first time in a long time, I believed them. Therapy also became a cornerstone of my rebuilding process. Sitting in that room with a professional who listened without judgment, I started to unpack the years of hurt and self-doubt. I began to see how much I had compromised my own happiness for the sake of a marriage that no longer served me. Through it all, Noah and Emma were my anchors. Their laughter, their questions, their simple, unwavering trust in me. It was the fuel that kept me going. I made sure they felt loved and secure, even as our world shifted around us. I explained things in terms they could understand, careful not to let my anger toward Isabella taint their perception of her. "Mommy and Daddy are making some changes," I told them one night during dinner. "But the most important thing is that we both love you very much. That will never change." Emma nodded solemnly, her big eyes full of understanding beyond her years. "We love you too, Daddy." Those words were worth more than anything. They reminded me why I was fighting so hard to reclaim my life. As I stood in front of the bathroom mirror one morning, buttoning up my shirt for a meeting, I barely recognized the man staring back at me. He looked stronger, more confident. He looked like someone who had been through hell, but refused to let it define him. Isabella noticed the change too. She tried to engage me in small talk, to pull me back into her web, but I was no longer interested. My focus was on my kids, my career, and my own well-being. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free to be myself. Free to live without constantly walking on eggshells. Free to rebuild the life I deserved. And this was just the beginning. The shift was subtle at first. Isabella, who had always carried herself with an air of superiority, started to crumble under the weight of her own decisions. The confidence she had displayed in allowing Victor to dominate our lives was now replaced by something I hadn't seen in her for years: doubt. It began when Victor stopped coming around. After the explosive confrontation, he had all but disappeared. For weeks, Isabella tried to act as though she was unbothered, maintaining her routine and her icy demeanor. But the cracks in her facade became more obvious with each passing day. Her texts became fewer, her phone barely lit up like it used to. The laughter she once reserved for Victor was gone. The validation she seemed to thrive on evaporated as people began to distance themselves from her. Victor, I learned through a mutual acquaintance, had moved on to someone else, a younger coworker who was oblivious to his manipulative ways. One evening, as I was helping Noah and Emma with their homework, Isabella came into the room. She hovered in the doorway, watching us with an unreadable expression. I ignored her at first, focusing on explaining a math problem to Noah, but I could feel her eyes on me, heavy with something unsaid. "Logan," she finally said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in months. "Can we talk?" I looked up, meeting her gaze. "What is it, Isabella?" She hesitated, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I've been thinking about everything." I set Noah's workbook aside and gestured for him and Emma to head upstairs. "You two finish up and get ready for bed," I said, keeping my tone light. Once they were gone, I turned back to Isabella. "All right, let's hear it." She stepped into the room, sitting down on the edge of the couch, her posture unusually timid. "I've made mistakes," she said quietly. "I've let things get out of hand." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "Victor, he wasn't what I thought he was," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought he cared about me, but he's gone. And now I see how much I've hurt you. Hurt us." Her words, though unexpected, didn't stir the emotions they might have a year ago. I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet detachment. "And what do you want me to do with that, Isabella?" I asked, my tone calm but firm. "I don't know," she said, her voice cracking. I want to fix things. For the kids. For us." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. For years, I had hoped for this moment. A moment where she would take responsibility, where she would see the damage she had done. But now that it was here, it felt hollow. Too little, too late. "You want to fix things," I repeated, shaking my head. "Do you even understand what you've done? You let that man humiliate me, disrespect me, and our family. You laughed while he tore me down in front of our children. And now, because he's gone, you suddenly realize you've made a mistake?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no urge to comfort her. "I was stupid," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't see it then, but I see it now. I took you for granted, Logan. I thought you'd always be there." "That's the problem, Isabella," I said, my voice steady. "You thought you could treat me however you wanted, and I'd just take it. But I'm not that man anymore. I deserve better. The kids deserve better." Her tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." I stood, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. "I appreciate the apology," I said, my voice softer now. "But it doesn't change anything. I've made my decision, and I'm moving forward. You need to figure out how to do the same." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Is there no chance for us? For this family?" I shook my head. "This family will always be about Noah and Emma. But as for us? No, Isabella. That chapter is closed." Her sobs grew quieter, and she nodded, as if finally accepting the reality of the situation. I left her sitting there, alone with her regret, and went upstairs to check on the kids. They were the reason I had fought so hard to rebuild my life, and they were the only thing that mattered now. As I tucked them in that night, I felt a strange sense of peace. Isabella's realization had come too late, but it didn't matter. I was no longer waiting for her to change, no longer hoping for her validation. I had found my own strength, my own worth. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The morning I filed the final divorce papers was surreal. I expected to feel sadness, anger, or maybe even regret. Instead, I felt relief, a quiet, liberating weight lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't the end I had envisioned when Isabella and I exchanged vows, but it was the one I needed to reclaim my peace. I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp autumn air, a new sense of purpose grounding me. The past year had been a battle for my dignity, my children's stability, and my self-respect. And now, I could finally say I had one. It wasn't a victory over Isabella or even Victor. It was a victory for myself. The days that followed felt lighter. Noah and Emma adjusted quickly to the changes in our lives. They no longer hesitated before speaking, no longer walked on eggshells. Our home had become a sanctuary, a place of laughter and love. I had fought for that, and I would protect it fiercely. My mornings began with purpose. I'd wake up early, prepare breakfast for the kids, and drive them to school. Watching them thrive brought me immense joy. Noah had joined the soccer team, and Emma had taken an interest in art. I made it a priority to attend every game and every school event, cheering them on like their biggest fan. Professionally, I was thriving too. I had poured myself into my work over the past year, and the effort was paying off. My boss had noticed my renewed focus and offered me a promotion, which I gladly accepted. The increased income gave me more freedom to provide for the kids and to plan for the future. One Friday afternoon, as I picked the kids up from school, Emma asked, "Daddy, can we go to the park today?" I smiled, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Of course we can. How about we grab some ice cream on the way?" Her eyes lit up, and Noah chimed in, "Can I get the double chocolate chip one?" "Only if you let me have a bite," I teased, earning a groan from him and a giggle from Emma. At the park, I sat on a bench, watching them play. Their laughter echoed around me, filling the space with a warmth I hadn't realized I had been missing. It was moments like these that reminded me why I had made the choices I did. Every sacrifice, every hard decision. It was all for them. As the sun began to set, a voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Logan?" I turned to see Claire, a friend I hadn't seen since college. She was holding the hand of a young boy who looked about Emma's age. "Claire," I said, surprised but genuinely happy to see her. "It's been years." "It has," she said with a warm smile. "I heard about everything. I'm sorry you had to go through that." I shrugged, a small smile playing on my lips. "It's been a journey, but I'm better for it." We spent the next hour catching up, talking about our lives, our kids, and the unexpected twists life had thrown our way. There was an ease to our conversation, a familiarity that felt refreshing. By the time we said our goodbyes, I felt a spark of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time: hope. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I began to see more of each other. We started with casual playdates for the kids, which soon turned into long conversations over coffee. She was kind, grounded, and compassionate. For the first time in years, I felt like I could let my guard down. But I was cautious. I wasn't ready to jump into anything, not when I was still healing. Claire understood that, and her patience only deepened my respect for her. Meanwhile, Isabella's life was unraveling. Mutual friends told me she had tried to rekindle her connection with Victor, only to find out he had moved on. Her attempts to gain sympathy from others fell flat, and her social circle began to dwindle. I didn't take any pleasure in her downfall, but I couldn't deny the poetic justice of it all. One evening, Isabella called me. It was the first time we had spoken directly in months. "Logan," she began, her voice hesitant. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I listened silently, letting her words hang in the air. "I appreciate that," I said finally, "but it doesn't change anything. We've both moved on, and I think that's for the best." She sighed, and I could hear the weight of her regret. "I hope you find happiness, Logan. You deserve it." "I hope the same for you," I said, meaning it. And with that, we ended the call, closing the door on that chapter of my life for good. As I tucked Noah and Emma into bed that night, Emma whispered, "Daddy, are you happy now?" I smiled, kissing her forehead. "I'm getting there, sweetheart." And I was. For the first time in a long time, I could see a future filled with love, laughter, and possibility. A future I was ready to embrace, one step at a time.